What if everything you believe about reality is wrong? What if cause and effect, the very foundation of science, logic, and reason, was just an illusion? This is the bomb that philosopher David Hume dropped on the world, and we're still dealing with the fallout. Imagine waking up tomorrow and discovering that when you drop your phone, it might not fall down, or that the sun rising every morning isn't guaranteed to happen again. That's exactly the kind of mind-bending doubt that Hume unleashed on society. In the 1700s, this quiet Scottish philosopher did something unthinkable. While other great thinkers were busy trying to prove how the world worked, Hume came along and said, "Actually, we can't prove anything at all." He showed that our most basic assumptions about reality, the things we take for granted every single day, are built on nothing more than habit and custom. It's like he pulled the rug out from under the entire scientific revolution. But here's what makes Hume's idea so dangerous. You can't disprove it. For over 250 years, the brightest minds in philosophy and science have tried to find a flaw in his argument. They've failed. Even Einstein, when he read Hume's work, was disturbed by the implications. Because if Hume is right, then science itself rests on a foundation of sand. We don't actually know that gravity will work tomorrow just because it worked today. We don't actually know that medicine that cured someone yesterday will cure them again today. We just assume it will, based on habit. This wasn't just some abstract philosophical puzzle. Hume's idea was like a virus that infected every field of human knowledge. It threatened religion by destroying the traditional arguments for God's existence. It undermined morality by questioning how we know right from wrong. It even challenged the basic idea of the self, the notion that you're the same person who started reading this video a minute ago. No wonder Hume was called the Great Infidel, and his books were banned by the Catholic Church. Today, we're going to dive into how this mild-mannered Scotsman created one of the most destructive ideas in human history, why his contemporaries were terrified of its implications, and how this same idea ended up revolutionizing modern science and philosophy. Because sometimes the most dangerous ideas aren't the ones that tell us what to think. They're the ones that make us question if we can know anything at all. Let's dive into the stakes by looking at just how earth-shattering Hume's idea really was. Think about everything you're doing right now. Maybe you're drinking coffee, sitting in a chair, breathing air. Every single one of these actions depends on your belief that what worked a second ago will work again. You trust that coffee will keep you awake because it did yesterday. You trust that your chair won't suddenly turn into jelly because it's always been solid before. You trust that oxygen will keep you alive because it always has. But Hume came along and said we have absolutely no logical reason to believe any of this. Zero. None. And he could prove it. Imagine being alive in the 1700s when this bombshell dropped. Scientists were just starting to figure out how the universe worked. Newton had discovered gravity. The scientific revolution was in full swing. Everyone thought we were finally starting to understand reality. Then Hume shows up and says, "Actually, you can't prove any of this will work tomorrow." This wasn't just an attack on science. It was an attack on human reason itself. Before Hume, philosophers like John Locke and René Descartes had tried to build systems of knowledge that would be absolutely certain. They thought pure reason could lead us to truth. Hume took a sledgehammer to all of that. He showed that even our most basic logical deductions, the kind of thinking we use in math and science, couldn't be justified by reason alone. The religious authorities were terrified. For centuries, they'd used logical arguments to prove God's existence. The most famous one went like this: everything that exists must have a cause. The universe exists. Therefore, the universe must have a cause, and that cause is God. Hume destroyed this argument completely. He showed that we can't even prove that things need causes, let alone jump to conclusions about God. But here's what made Hume's idea truly dangerous. He wasn't some crazy person spouting nonsense. His argument was airtight. He used pure logic to show that pure logic couldn't give us certainty about the world. It was like using a knife to prove that knives don't exist. Even his enemies had to admit that they couldn't find any holes in his reasoning. The more they tried to prove him wrong, the more they realized he might be right. And if he was right, then everything, science, religion, morality, knowledge itself, was built on nothing more than human habits and assumptions. This was the intellectual equivalent of a nuclear bomb. And just like a nuclear bomb, once it was dropped, there was no going back. The old certainties were gone forever. And the most terrifying part, over 250 years later, no one has found a way to defuse it. At first glance, David Hume's early life doesn't seem like it would create history's greatest skeptic. Born in 1711 near Edinburgh, Scotland, he grew up in a world that was obsessed with finding absolute truth. His family wanted him to become a lawyer, a nice, respectable profession where everything was about facts and evidence. But young David had other ideas. By age 12, Hume was already sneaking into his family's library, devouring books about ancient philosophy. While other kids were playing outside, he was puzzling over questions that would later shake the foundations of human knowledge. But here's what's fascinating. Unlike many philosophers who started as rebels, Hume began as a true believer in reason. He actually thought he could use logic to figure out how the universe worked. At the University of Edinburgh, which he entered at the shockingly young age of 10, yes, you read that right, Hume discovered something that would change everything: Newton's new physics. Newton had shown that the entire universe followed mathematical laws. It was like a perfect machine, with every cause leading to its effect. Young Hume was completely blown away. He decided to become the Newton of human nature, to discover the absolute laws that governed how people think and behave. But then something unexpected happened. The more Hume tried to prove these laws existed, the more he realized there was a massive problem. He kept running into a wall that no one else had noticed. He couldn't prove that anything caused anything else. Not just in human behavior, but in physics, in logic, in everything. It was like discovering a single loose thread that, when pulled, made the entire sweater of human knowledge unravel. This realization hit him so hard that at age 23, he had what we'd today call a mental breakdown. He couldn't sleep. He couldn't eat. He developed strange spots on his skin from stress. Here was a young man who had set out to prove that everything could be known for certain, only to discover that nothing could be known for certain. His doctor's diagnosis? Too much thinking. But instead of running away from this terrifying discovery, Hume did something remarkable. He decided to follow his logic wherever it led, no matter how disturbing the implications. He locked himself away and wrote a book that would change philosophy forever, a treatise of human nature. He was so excited about his discovery that he thought it would make him famous. Instead, it nearly destroyed his life. The book was published when he was 28. You know what happened? Nothing. As Hume later wrote, it fell dead-born from the press. People either ignored it or dismissed it as the ravings of a young troublemaker. But that was about to change. Because while the book might have fallen dead-born from the press, the ideas inside it were about to rise up and haunt the dreams of every thinking person in Europe. Let's get into the heart of Hume's dangerous idea, the problem of causation. Picture yourself watching two billiard balls on a pool table. The white ball rolls and hits the red ball, making it move. Simple, right? We see this kind of thing happen thousands of times every day. But Hume asked a question that seems stupid at first but becomes terrifying the more you think about it. How do you know the white ball caused the red ball to move? Your first response might be, well, I saw it happen. But Hume would say, no, what you saw was one event, white ball moving, then another event, red ball moving. You didn't actually see the cause. Think about that. You've never actually seen a cause. You've only seen things happen one after another. The cause part is something your mind adds to the picture. Okay, you might say, but we can prove it scientifically. Here's where Hume drops his nuclear bomb. No, we can't. Because every scientific proof relies on the assumption that what happened before will happen again. We can run the billiard ball experiment 1,000,000 times, but that doesn't prove it will work on try 1,000,001. When we say we've proven something scientifically, we're actually just saying, this has happened a lot before. Hume went even further. He showed that even logic itself can't prove causation. Think about it. Why do we believe that every effect needs a cause? Because it's logical, you might say. But that's circular reasoning. We're using logic to prove logic works. It's like trying to lift yourself up by pulling on your own bootstraps. This is where things get really weird. Hume showed that our entire understanding of reality isn't based on reason at all. It's based on habit. We believe the sun will rise tomorrow because it always has before. We believe food will satisfy our hunger because it always has before. We believe fire will burn us because it always has before. But we don't have any logical reason to believe these patterns will continue. We're like chickens who think the farmer is our friend because he's fed us every day, right up until the day he wrings our neck. But wait, it gets worse. Remember how scientists say correlation doesn't equal causation? Hume showed that we can never prove causation at all, ever. Think about what this means for science, for medicine, for technology. Everything we think we know about how the world works is based on patterns we've noticed, not on proof. We're pattern recognition machines pretending to be logical beings. The scariest part? Modern science has actually confirmed a lot of what Hume said. Quantum physics has shown that at the smallest levels, causation breaks down completely. Particles can appear and disappear without cause. Effects can happen before their causes. The more we learn about reality, the more it looks like Hume was right. Our common sense understanding of cause and effect might just be a useful fiction. This realization sent shockwaves through every field of human knowledge. Religious leaders couldn't prove God caused the universe. Scientists couldn't prove their theories would work tomorrow. Moralists couldn't prove actions caused good or bad consequences. Hume had pulled the rug out from under the entire enterprise of human knowledge, and he did it so effectively that philosophers are still arguing about it today. The ripple effects of Hume's idea spread like wildfire once people actually understood what he was saying. In universities across Europe, professors realized they had a massive problem on their hands. If you couldn't prove cause and effect, how could you prove anything? The scientific community was especially shaken. Here they were, proud of their experiments and proofs, and Hume had just shown that their entire method rested on an unprovable assumption. Immanuel Kant, one of the greatest philosophers ever, admitted that Hume's argument woke him from his dogmatic slumbers. Imagine being so disturbed by an idea that you spend 10 years writing a massive book trying to solve it. That's exactly what Kant did. His famous work, Critique of Pure Reason, was basically a 800-page attempt to escape Hume's trap. Did he succeed? Well, philosophers are still debating that one. The religious backlash was even more intense. Churches labeled Hume as the great infidel and tried to get him fired from his university positions. Why? Because he destroyed their favorite argument for God's existence, the idea that everything needs a cause. So the universe must have been caused by God. Hume showed this argument was circular. We can't prove everything needs a cause, so we can't use that to prove God exists. But here's where it gets really interesting. Some people tried to use Hume's idea to attack science itself. They said, well, if we can't prove anything for certain, why bother with science at all? Hume's response was brilliant. He said just because we can't prove something with absolute certainty doesn't mean we should stop being reasonable. We still need to eat, even if we can't prove food will satisfy our hunger tomorrow. We still need to do science even if we can't prove our theories with absolute certainty. The personal consequences for Hume were severe. He was blocked from teaching positions at universities. His books were banned in several countries. Some people even accused him of trying to destroy morality itself. After all, if you can't prove actions cause consequences, how can you prove anything is right or wrong? Hume's answer was that morality comes from human feelings and social habits, not from logical proofs. This was another revolutionary idea that people weren't ready for. Despite the attacks, Hume remained surprisingly cheerful. While other philosophers were having existential crises over his ideas, he was playing cards and enjoying dinner parties. When asked if he was worried about death, he basically shrugged and said he'd wait and see what happened. This drove his religious critics crazy. How could someone who questioned everything be so calm about it? But perhaps the most fascinating reaction came from scientists themselves. Instead of rejecting Hume completely, many started thinking differently about what science could achieve. They stopped claiming they could prove absolute truths and started talking about probabilities and useful models. This shift in thinking actually made science stronger, not weaker. It's like they finally admitted they were building on sand but learned to build better buildings anyway. Even today, cognitive scientists are finding that Hume was right about how our brains work. We really do learn through habit and association more than through pure logic. Artificial intelligence researchers have discovered that trying to program computers with logical rules doesn't work as well as letting them learn from patterns, exactly what Hume said humans do. The most fascinating part of Hume's story is what happened once the dust settled. Instead of destroying knowledge, his dangerous idea ended up transforming it. Modern science actually embraced Hume's skepticism and became stronger for it. Scientists today don't claim they can prove theories with absolute certainty. They talk about confidence levels, probabilities, and models that work until proven wrong. Take quantum physics, for example. When scientists discovered that particles can appear without causes and effects can happen before their causes, they didn't throw up their hands and quit. Instead, they created mathematical models that work incredibly well, even if they can't explain the why behind everything. It's exactly what Hume suggested. Focus on what works rather than demanding absolute certainty. Einstein himself, despite being uncomfortable with Hume's ideas, ended up proving him right in a way. Relativity theory showed that even time and space aren't absolute. They depend on the observer. Causation itself gets weird when you're dealing with relativistic physics. Yet we still manage to build GPS systems and nuclear power plants using these theories. Even the field of artificial intelligence has vindicated Hume. Early AI researchers tried to program computers with logical rules and failed miserably. Modern AI systems work much better because they learn from patterns and associations. Exactly how Hume said human minds work. Every time you use ChatGPT or facial recognition, you're seeing Hume's ideas about how minds work put into practice. But perhaps Hume's most important legacy is how he changed our relationship with uncertainty. Before Hume, people thought they needed absolute certainty to have knowledge. After Hume, we learned to be comfortable with probability and practical certainty. It's like he gave humanity permission to say, we can't be 100% sure, but we can be sure enough to act. This new attitude transformed fields far beyond philosophy. Modern medicine doesn't claim to know exactly how every treatment works, but it can show statistically that they help patients. Engineers don't need to understand the fundamental nature of gravity to build bridges that stay up. Even economists learn to work with probabilities rather than claiming they could predict markets with certainty. Hume himself would probably be amused by all this. He never wanted to destroy knowledge. He wanted to put it on honest foundations. He showed us that we don't need absolute certainty to live, think, or make progress. Sometimes the most dangerous ideas end up being the most liberating ones. In the end, Hume died just as he lived, calmly facing uncertainty. When he was dying in 1776, his friend James Boswell visited him, expecting to find him terrified of death since he wasn't sure about the afterlife. Instead, he found Hume playing cards and joking with friends. When asked about facing death without religious certainty, Hume simply replied that he had been studying arguments about mortality all his life and had never found any convincing evidence that death should be feared. This perfectly captured Hume's greatest insight, that humans can live meaningful, moral, and happy lives without absolute certainty about anything. He showed us that it's okay to admit we don't know everything. It's okay to act based on probability rather than proof. It's okay to trust our experiences and habits while remaining open to being wrong. Today, Hume's dangerous idea doesn't seem so dangerous anymore. Every scientist who works with probabilities instead of absolutes is following in his footsteps. Every doctor who updates their treatments based on new evidence is using his approach. Every AI researcher who builds systems that learn from patterns is proving him right. Maybe the most remarkable thing about Hume isn't that he discovered we can't prove anything with absolute certainty. It's that he showed us we don't need to. Science still works, morality still matters, life still has meaning. We just have to be humble enough to admit we're all figuring it out as we go along. Hume once wrote that the wise person proportions their belief to the evidence. In a world of social media echo chambers, conspiracy theories, and people claiming absolute certainty about everything, maybe this is exactly the kind of dangerous idea we need right now. Sometimes the most powerful thing we can say isn't, "I know," but "I think," not "I'm certain," but "I'm willing to learn." So the next time you drop something and expect it to fall, remember David Hume. You can't prove it will fall, but you can be reasonably confident it will. And sometimes that's all we need to keep moving forward.